Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the morning meeting. Excited to have everyone back. I'm Brittany Bolton with Groundwork Ohio. I'll share a brief State House update and then I'm going to pass it over to our guest. So this week we've had a pretty busy committee schedule. So shout out to our team for tracking multiple committees happening simultaneously. We really appreciate that. Um, the legislature is going to be on break for pretty much all of April, so things should quiet down a little bit. The House is slated to come back May 13th. We are looking at the May 5th primary, so folks are going to be in their districts campaigning, helping out one another's campaigns, traveling the state for most of the next month. There were no Senate committees or sessions scheduled this week, but they are having an as-needed session scheduled for next week in the Ohio Senate, and only one Senate session scheduled for all of April. So we really expect it to be pretty quiet around here. The biggest update is that the House Children and Human Services Committee did meet on the yesterday, and they heard the child care fraud allegation legislation. They heard 647. We've got it had its fifth hearing, and there are a couple amendments that we have on the committee website. We'll link here for you. And then 649 heard some additional testimony. This was its third hearing, and there is an amendment that has been adopted clarifying that DCY shall not, Department of Children and Youth shall not store or capture photo or video evidence of children attending in favor of the live video feed, among other changes. So the amendment language for both of those bills is on the website, and we'll share this out in our newsletter. Another note that the midwifery bill, House Bill 537, which will regulate midwifery and birth centers, was also heard, and it will declare the Day of the Midwife. We saw 27 proponent witnesses testify on that this week, so that one is gaining some steam. I am not going to do any federal update because we have somebody with far more insights than me here today. So I'm going to pass it over here shortly to our friend Joe O'Hearn. But before I do that, I wanted to just put in one more plug for our Vote Baby Vote campaign. We are encouraging everyone we know to register their folks to vote. This is a nonpartisan campaign, just trying to activate people who care about kids to get out and vote this year. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our friend Joe O'Hearn with the First 5 Years Fund. Joe is going to share a federal update on appropriations, and if we have a little bit of time, we might get into some tax policy too. He's the director of coalition and campaigns at First 5 Years Fund, coordinating advocacy and legislative priorities. A veteran political strategist, Joe has led campaigns in more than a dozen states, from electing Sherrod Brown, who many of us know, to raising $15 million for historic Mississippi Senate race. He began his career organizing for President Obama in the Iowa caucuses, and he's originally from Iowa. Joe, we really loved having you out to Ohio in person at Momentum last year, and we're happy to have you back on the Zoom screen. It's good to see you.
Thanks for having me. Very excited to be here. Always good to catch up with everyone from Ohio. It is March Madness though, so I do have to say go Hawks to all the Ohio State fans that I'm currently sitting in front of. It is mandatory for all us Iowans when dealing with you Ohioans. But happy to get into some federal updates. And thank you for that intro, Brittany. But just as Refresher, First 5 Years Fund, for those of you who don't know, we're a national organization focused on protecting and prioritizing and building bipartisan support for quality childcare and early learning programs at the federal level. So we are super spoiled. We just get to do childcare at the federal level and be hyper focused on those issues. But there's obviously a lot going on in DC right now when it comes to childcare and early learning programs. Just as a kind of quick recap, the three kind of core programs that we deal with and that a lot of the federal funding for childcare and early learning move through is the first one is the Child Care and Development Block Grant. That's the one that provides states the funding they need to subsidize childcare for low-income families. Then there's obviously Head Start. Head Start's been around for 60 years now, provides early learning, nutrition, and medical care and other services for children and families experiencing poverty, homelessness, or living in foster care. And then there's a smaller program in terms of funding size, but it is a very important one for states. It's the Preschool Development Grant Birth Through Five. Don't let the name mislead you. It is really a competitive grant program for states to help with their back-end infrastructure for early learning and childcare in their state. I know a lot of states, they recently had another round. I don't know if Ohio got one. They did,
We
yeah.
did, yeah, we
Nice.
did.
So, another core program that we work to ensure that the funding remains stable for. So we just wrapped up fiscal year 26 appropriations here in DC about a month ago because nothing ever moves on time here in DC. We're excited that the two biggest programs for childcare and early learning, CCDBG and Head Start, did receive modest increases in their funding, about 85 million. It is a um, in these tough budget times and a tough political environment time for any program to receive increased funding, seeing that childcare programs were prioritized in the appropriations process is always reassuring. They continue to receive strong bipartisan support. And then some other programs that also deal with early learning, like I mentioned, PDG received level funding. IDA programs with help with kind of special education and early intervention programs received level funding. And C Campus, which is a smaller program that helps colleges provide affordable childcare to students with children, also received level funding. So we continue to see these programs prioritized on both sides of the aisle, which is great. We continue to see that progress in kind of moving the needle inch by inch to increase the funding because we all know these programs could use more funding to serve more kids and families. But because they took so long doing fiscal year 26 appropriations, it's already fiscal year 27 appropriations. So that process kicked off here this month. Um, and got going. So we actually are excited to lead an early learning community letter that I know a lot of state organizations, including Groundwork, have signed on to. It calls for increased funding for those core programs and matches a lot of the Dear Colleague letters that we see on the Hill. So if people are looking for a way to take action and make sure federal lawmakers know that it's important to protect and prioritize childcare, now is a great time to be contacting your lawmakers and encouraging them to sign on to one of the Dear Colleague letters that are circulating around these programs. There are both Democratic and Republican letters that they can sign on to. All those letters call for robust investments in these early learning programs. I throw a QR code on there. We love a QR code here at FFYF. So feel free to scan it. It'll take you to our kind of appropriations capsule and also where you can take action to send your lawmaker an easy email encouraging them to sign on to those Dear Colleague letters, which, given that childcare has been in the news a lot, there's been a lot of talk about program integrity. We think it's really important right now to continue to show that strong bipartisan support for these programs and the need for increased and continued investment in them. So we are off to the races. We're already seeing a lot of new members sign on to these letters, which is really reassuring, but never hurts to keep hearing from the folks back home about them. So talk a little bit about, and I know this is very relevant in Ohio because it sounds like you're dealing with it at the state legislative level. Is there's been a lot of increased attention around childcare and because of stories in the news about Minnesota and the alleged fraud and some of the um, already already prosecuted fraud cases that happened in Minnesota, where some people, bad actors, were taking advantage of the system. As we know, fraud is bad. We want to make sure that the money in these programs is getting to the working families that need them. So that has kicked up a lot of attention here in DC. That we saw a couple of big things happen right away. So I think it's always good to kind of give an update where those are at. There's a big shout out. There's a big instant kind of five states, Minnesota, California, New York, blanking on the last one, all got letters from HHS saying they were going to pause their funding for a lot of social service programs, including CCDF funding, which is where the CCDBG money moves through. The judge that those states, of course, sued to pause that. The judge ruled, gave a preliminary injunction preventing the administration from pausing their funding. So there's no states right now that are having paused funding. The money for all these programs is flowing. We have not heard of any states having issues with that. What we do know is that some states, and I think pretty much every state at this point, got some additional reporting requests. I think what a lot of people understood to be, if you remember, it seems like more than a year ago, but a year ago, some of the Doge efforts around defend the spend. A lot of states got requests for some of that additional defend the spend reporting. So just some additional information for state administrators to figure out or to fill out, or additional data that the feds wanted to collect. But again, we have not heard, and it sounds like, and it's not been the case in Ohio, any delays in funding getting out, especially right now, to the states through their CCDF funds and drawdowns. So we know that is ongoing, and that's kind of the immediate action that happened at the executive level. Um, and there's obviously been action at the congressional level. We've seen 5 different congressional hearings in the last 3 months. God, it is almost through March. Um, so we've seen a handful of hearings. There have been in House Oversight, House Ed and Workforce, and Senate Judiciary and Senate Help Committee. I think the biggest takeaway and most, kind of for us at least that we saw of all this is nobody was negative on the core early learning and childcare programs at the federal level. Across the aisle, across the board, people were supportive of these programs. People understand the need for federal funding to help working families afford quality childcare. What we have seen is an attention on program integrity, especially a lot of talk around the political side of it, around Minnesota and Governor Walz with these hearings. But we haven't seen anyone really attacking these programs or the purpose of these programs, which is always a good sign. I think we've all been through fights where, once you start getting down that partisan road with it, it makes it really tough to continue to build support for the program. Thankfully, that is not the case here. Everyone continues to see the important need for these quality early learning programs. So I've got a QR code for our briefing room on safeguarding access to early learning and childcare there, where we have some great updates, including a joint letter that everyone did that has some solid messaging around how to talk about this. And then on top of hearings, there's also been a handful of new bills put forward. The House Ed and Workforce Committee marked up about 7 to 8 bills on fraud. They were all very technical. Some of them doing with how the HHS secretary was to kind of be more active in dealing with states when they have improper payments or error rates. Some of it is not fully people understanding all the technical aspects of how these programs already work and the safeguards that they already have in place, because they do have a lot. I think if there are state administrator folks on and providers that take subsidy, they can tell you about all the reporting that they have to do and all the safeguards already built into the program. But there are some technical changes, some calls for GAO reports were all really the focus of the legislation there. Those were marked up. 2 of them did come out of committee on a bipartisan basis. The rest were done by Republican votes only. And you can stay up to date on new childcare legislation. We have a great ledge tracker on our website where we keep up to date all the childcare bills. You can find them there. We keep that pretty up to date. And then there were a few bills in the Senate around fraud legislation as well. Some of these were focused on the paying versus attendance versus enrollment. Those were really kind of standalone messaging bills. We haven't seen a lot of traction for those, which is good because we know how important it is, especially for states that have switched to enrollment versus attendance. Even if they're paying on enrollment versus attendance, they are still collecting that attendance data and submitting it and having to hold on to it. But we know it helps providers out a lot. There's been some legislation around that, but again, those have been standalone messaging bills, and you can definitely stay up to date on those bills that are coming out of Congress with our ledge tracker. But the bottom line of all of it is childcare is essential for working families with young children. We continue to see the bipartisan support and making it a priority for these programs, which is great. But we do know even short delays in funding can harm providers, families, workforce. We know the second there's a huge hiccup in DC or even a small hiccup and funding gets delayed, that creates huge problems for you on the ground. So we know it's really important to push back against any of those funding pauses. And like I said at the beginning, we know fraud is bad. We want to make sure funding continues to go to the working families that need it, but oversight needs to be swift and targeted, and proportional to so that we continue to see the funding get to where it needs to go. So those some of the big takeaways of what's happening here in DC. I would be remiss of not doing some new polling that we had, and sharing with how that plays into everything we've seen happen in DC. We actually did some polling right towards the end of January. We wanted to see how people were reacting to a lot of the news around Minnesota and childcare, all the childcare stories that were kicking around. And we continue to see that across the board, Americans and voters know that childcare is a major problem or in a state of crisis for working families. Full 80% of voters nationally think it's at least a major problem, and 68% of GOP primary voters thinks it's at least a major problem. So across the board, people know childcare is a challenge for working families. And nearly half of all Americans had seen or read something about the stories that were coming out of Minnesota. So it was breaking through. People were hearing about it. Um, but even though they were hearing those stories, people continue to think it is a good use of federal tax dollars. 74% of voters nationally think that it is a good use of federal tax dollars to fund childcare and early learning programs. Even 52% of GOP primary voters. So again, this is a bipartisanly popular use of federal dollars. And more than two-thirds of voters believe it was important for President Trump to support policies to help working families afford quality childcare. And again, 52% of GOP primary voters thought this. So even after all the news stories, all the YouTube videos, what have you, people continue to support these programs, continue to support federal funding for early learning and childcare programs, which is always reassuring to see. Um, and some of the messaging that we've seen really work in dealing with this, I think I've shared this with Groundwork before, but um, being able to acknowledge that fraud is bad, that we need to ensure federal funds help families find and afford quality child care, is really important to do initially, and then immediately get back to the importance and necessity of these programs. So, federal programs that support childcare are necessary to ensure low-income working families have access to affordable quality childcare so that they can go to work or school. Without these programs, childcare will become more expensive and harder to find for all families. This message really resonated with voters across the board because once you acknowledge the fraud, it's really important to get back to the positives of why people like quality early learning and childcare and why people like support federal funding for those types of programs. So some easy messaging that works really well. And like I said, voter support childcare, address and pivot it. And then we've been doing a lot of, and I know Groundwork has been doing, it's just really important to keep flooding the zone with messages about childcare, about how important childcare is, and the need to, and the importance for strong appropriations and modernization efforts. Um, so. What can Congress do? The last kind of little bit here that we wanted to share with everyone is there have been so far about 110 bills in this current Congress that relate directly to early learning and childcare. I think that number has ticked up a few since I made this slide even, and 48 of those bills have been bipartisan. So we continue to see across the aisle, across the board, people want to prioritize childcare and find solutions for working families. And 22 of those have been direct to early childhood workforce because people understand there's not enough supply and not enough early childhood education providers out there to meet the need. So one of the great ways that Congress can do something about this is through CCDBG. I believe I'm probably a little off with my like in-state numbers, but I know CCDBG is a great program for working families that helps them afford quality childcare. On average, a family goes from, having to make around a $284 a month copay, versus having to make $1,000 a month in childcare payments. The difference between having access to that program and not is like a whole family budget. So it's really important that we continue to find ways to get eligible more funding for eligible families to access this really core program. It serves over 1 million families nationwide. That's just for kids under 5. I think it's like 1.5 million families once you include some of the after school programs for kids over 5. Um, and it is a block grant, so it does allow states the flexibility to provide the kind of choice that parents really need in choosing the care and learning that's best for their families. So there is a really great bill that's currently kicking around right now in the Senate, that I wanted to make sure I flagged for everyone. It's called the Child Care Modernization Act. It's a bipartisan bill from Senator Fisher from Nebraska and Senator Gillibrand from New York. Um, it is an update to CCDBG, essentially a reauthorization of it. Doesn't do anything like massively groundbreaking, but does make some important updates that we know we've been waiting for in this program. Obviously, it ensures choice and makes sure that CCBG continues to allow parents to make the choices that best suit their family needs. One of the really important tweaks that it does is it gives states 5 years to move to a cost estimation model when it comes to reimbursing providers, which I know is really important for providers as it does, as we've seen in the states that have shifted to this, increase reimbursement rates and get it closer to the actual cost of care for the providers in terms of the reimbursements that they are getting. Continues to give states the flexibility in choosing how they use the block grant across all the different settings and mixed deliveries that they can choose from. And it does have really broad bipartisan support. We've seen in our polling that 62% of voters nationally, and that does break 50% with GOP primary voters, support this kind of program and this kind of update to the CCDBG. So got a QR code there for folks to learn more about the Child Care Modernization Act. Please feel free to bug your senators about this bill and how they should get on board with it. We have seen growing bipartisan support for it. I think recently we have, I think, 2 Dems and 2 Rs on it right now, and a few new co-sponsors getting ready to hop on as well. So with that, I am happy to take any questions. I'm also happy if you want to chat a little bit about tax, depending on where we are on time, but happy to do either, Brittany.
Thanks, Joe. Does anybody have questions they want to pop off mute or throw in the chat? I'll note we did send a letter to every member of Ohio's congressional delegation encouraging them to support the Dear Colleagues letter based on first 5 years funds action alert. So we really appreciate and look toward that when we do our outreach. Is there, are there any questions about appropriations or childcare integrity legislation? I could share some, but I would love to take advantage of having Joe here to talk a little bit about tax too. Um, okay, Heather asks, what do we know about the pending NPRM?
Which one? So there are, recently they did an NPRM on CCVG. That like window for comments closed, I think a few weeks ago, or maybe in February. What they did with that NPRM is basically rolled back what the Biden era one had done, which had some kind of mandating of states moving to things like paying on enrollment versus attendance. I think it's really important. I know the one people kind of get confused on is the current rule that they are proposing does not require states to do anything. It just lets states choose. It just rolls back the Biden era rule of mandating states do things like pay on enrollment versus attendance. So it still gives states the flexibility and choice that they need to do what they need to do. It does not stop them from making some of those changes. Yes, thank you. I know I get stuck in acronyms. Thank you, Brittany, for that.
Yeah, of course.
Um, So yes, that I think is the one I know people often ask about. And then there is likely to be a Head Start NPRM coming down sooner rather than later. Not we, but nobody's really seen what that will include yet. But once there is, don't worry, I'm sure we will be asking for everyone's help and responding to it as well.
And just to clarify, in Ohio, we've had, I think all the signaling from our leadership that Ohio will be continuing to be payment based on attendance despite any question at the federal level. This is something that's come out in press conferences with the governor and in committee hearings across the board. So um, just want to make sure there's not confusion kind of around where our current leadership stands. Any other questions around appropriations or um, program integrity review proposals?
Brittany, I was just going to add, hi Joe,
Yeah.
that I think it's worth noting that the language that they put out for the NPRM on the Head Start performance standards uses the same like increasing or the flexibility, and it's the same language that was around the childcare um, rules. So we expect it'll be similar in rolling back the different Biden era requirements like the pay parity with public schools and some of those things.
Thanks, Julie. Okay. I don't know if we have enough time to dive too deeply into tax, but Joe, are there like headlines you would like to share in a few minutes
Yeah, I can
around?
give you.
Yeah.
I think the just really quickly there are three updated childcare tax credits in the Republican reconciliation bill that passed last summer. There's a lot in that bill. This is just about the childcare tax credits. Let me be very clear. So three specific credits that were in it. The first one was the CDCTC, the Child Independent Care Tax Credit, which is different than the CTC. It is the one that lets families deduct some of the costs that they paid for childcare off their yearly taxes. It's not refundable, but they did expand it for the first time since 2001. It now goes up to about an average of an extra $900 for families, which isn't going to solve childcare, but every little bit helps with families trying to afford middle class families trying to afford childcare right now. So that got an update. The other big one that I think is exciting, we kind of see where this will go, is the employer provided child care tax credit, 45F. This one is allows businesses that provide childcare to their employees either through on-site childcare or contracting with a local provider, a tax credit. This got a huge update. Also hadn't been updated since 2001 when childcare costs were very different. But this one got a huge update. It went up from $150,000 to $400,000 or $500,000 for small businesses. So it's a big update. It really gives an opportunity for providers to and local businesses to work together to provide that childcare that they so desperately need. And then the other one is dependent care assistance plans. Those are those flexible spending accounts some employers offer where you can put some of your hard-earned cash into a tax-free account to lower your kind of your overall tax burden at the end of the year. That got an update to $7,500.
And I'll just add briefly on the 45F piece that I know some folks on the call are familiar with the new child care cred program that we passed in our most recent state budget. Those two benefits can be married to one another. They can stack. So we created a one pager that I'll put in the chat. Folks are welcome to share if you've got relationships with your local chambers of commerce to get it out to employers around Ohio. Sorry to jump in there, Joe.
No, that's yeah. I love that there's one that they can stack with. That's great.
Wonderful. Well, um, Joe's got QR codes up here. Any parting thoughts or action alerts? We've got the link in the chat for folks to take action on the Dear Colleagues letter. Anything else that you'd like for folks to think about as homework as they're moving on to their
No,
Thursday?
approach is the big one right now. Making sure they hear from you is really important. We want to continue that bipartisan support for these programs and want to continue those year over year increases in funding as much as we can. So please reach out to your members of Congress and encourage them to sign.
Thank you so much, Joe. We really appreciate you and your whole team, and thank you for making it easy for us and equipping us with all of the tools that we need to do that advocacy. We really appreciate it.
Of course, thanks for having me.
All right. Have a great Thursday, everyone. Bye.